Hey guys, welcome to Overhauled with the Diesel Queen, aka Melissa Petersmann, which is me. I am on here today with Michael. Today we're going to kind of cover some things about aftertreatment and some other fun topics. He's currently trying to start up his own business, so I would like to introduce you guys to Michael. Michael, why don't you kind of introduce yourself, give us a little bit of a background.
My name is Michael Sieperda. I'm from Dublin, Texas, and that's where I'm currently trying to start my business and working on Class 8 trucks and using road service and building a small little shop that we got and bringing in trucks. We just got a deal with a local trucking company to maintain their trucks, so we're happy about that. And given the last couple of days of here being frozen, not getting a lot of business, but it'll pick up once they can drive back to our shop. So that's good.
Frozen in Texas.
That's amazing, ain't it? It's crazy. 2 days of ice and the state shuts down.
Damn. Yeah, I've always heard that, but I've never, obviously growing up in Wyoming and then now living in Indiana, it's kind of, winter's a normal thing. So
School here, they canceled the school before it even iced over.
I need to move to. I should have lived in Texas when I grew up. That would have been nice, unless it was like 36 inches of snow and you had a drift that was blocking your doorway. You went to school, or if it was below -40, then you were allowed to stay home.
Hey, when I was a kid, we still went. These days, not so much. Everybody's afraid to wreck their cars in the ice because everybody's forgotten how to drive on ice nowadays.
Facts. All right, so we kind of want to we kind of talked about this, before we started recording, is the whole after treatment thing. So you said that you kind of entered the industry right when after treatment was coming into Class 8 trucks. What kind of challenges? I kind of understand. I kind of entered the construction industry right as this was getting big, and obviously because they came way after for after treatment, but. So I kind of want to talk to you about like the challenges of having to deal with that new, because that's a lot of stuff. Like even though initially it was only IT4 interim tier 4 stuff, and then it was final tier 4 with the def, and so I want you to kind of dive in a little bit on how that changed your job and the challenges that came along with it.
All right, so I started in 07 after I'd gotten out of the military and got into a leasing company, Penske Truck Leasing, and when I got into it, of course, it was 07, so they had a whole bunch of brand new trucks. If anybody knows anything about giant rental fleet business, working with them, they got me on the ground running about all this stuff, even though I was going to technical college. That really didn't do anything for me at the time. So I quit doing that and getting into the industry and then seeing it, how simple the 06s and 07s, you had the EGR stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And that was the basic of what emissions was called for. And you still had the blow by tubes, oil dripping everywhere. No one cared. It wasn't that big of a deal.
Yeah.
If there isn't an oil slick under a Detroit, it's probably out of oil, kind of thing. So
good old days.
Yeah, the good old days. 08 rolled around. We got our first set of the first ones I remember being in were the Cascadias Freightliners and 08s, and they had that pre tier 4 system just with the DPF, and it was nice because it didn't break there in the first few 100,000 miles. But it's when those systems started messing up and we had to sit there and run diagnostics. If you weren't familiar with the program and no one told you what to look for, you were sitting on the phone a lot with people trying to figure this stuff out. And then and with that particular fleet, we didn't have dealership access.
Yeah.
So it was really kind of hard to run through and figure it out. And the nice thing was they did give you a step-by-step diagnostic page to run through it and follow. And it made it work really good, made it concise, somewhat understandable, but it was just diagnosing it and watching it and figuring out was the biggest challenge to everybody. And there were a few guys that I worked with were contemplating on quitting because of this. So it was like a whole entire change the industry, which is to me was a good thing for me, because then I got to learn on the ground right off the bat this whole new system. So it was really great from an education standpoint. It really sucked when you went to work on it because you didn't know what you're doing. And
Yep.
you're breaking apart systems that you may or may not know how to do. Looking at
Yep.
the DPF filters, figuring out why they weren't working, and then they put the def on it, which made it really complicated because then you had a NOx sensors and crap like that. You're like, what in the hell is this stuff?
Yep.
And going with NOx, and the other issue was they still had bugs in the system. So it was like, holy Moses. So everybody was all sorts of confused and pissed off, and a lot of people didn't buy a lot of those units there in the beginning because they were waiting. Everybody was waiting in the industry, and so experienced mechanics in that system were even hard to come by even 2 or 3 years afterward.
Yeah.
So it was a very complicated time. It sucked, and we were putting in to diagnose a after treatment system all day. It
Mm-hmm.
was a 24-hour thing. There was no way you're going to figure it out unless you exactly knew where the problem was.
Well, as us mechanics know, the first step to being able to properly diagnose something is understanding how the system works, right? Having a very clear understanding of how it works, and especially on new things like that, where I got the luxury of going to a technical college that was actually for semis. So obviously we covered all that after treatment stuff, but for people that entered the industry right as that was entering for Class 8 trucks, that's kind of a hard system to understand. And, that especially when DEF came into play, there's a lot of shit going on in those after treatment systems. And, if you don't fully understand how the system works, as all mechanics know, it's kind of hard to figure out what's wrong with something if you don't know how it's supposed to run when it's not broken, right? So,
Yeah, that was the biggest thing is when we were doing with it, and I was in the same boat as the other guys in the shop. We all started on the same foot, is trying to figure this out. And it was interesting. And we didn't know how the system worked because, ironically enough, every time we saw it, it was already broke. So we're like,
yeah.
what's it supposed to do? We don't know what it's
Yep.
supposed to look like. If you understand the premise of the idea, but even then, if you had a DPF that burned through and you still couldn't figure out why it was throwing a code because you didn't physically take it apart yet, all of a sudden you take it apart and there's a giant hole in the middle of it. It's like, oh, that's the reason why.
Yep.
That was a big thing there in the beginning. Then you had EGR coolers that would break, and then like, what? It's losing water. Okay, just replace the EGR cooler and go down the road. Like,
Yeah.
nope, that messed. If someone had did that in a previous repair and didn't fix the DPF like they were supposed to,
Yep.
you would have problems and not away. It was like,
Yep.
and of course the blown turbos was another issue. I was
Mm-hmm.
like, oh, what do you do?
There. You got to replace all that shit a lot of times.
The customer was pissed off because all of a sudden now he's sitting on 10 grand worth of exhaust parts.
At least.
I'm like, yeah, it was insane. So yeah, there was a lot of people that were mad when we first got into that business. First, a lot of people into that emission stuff and having them pay out of pocket for this crap. So it was like
Yep.
insane. And of course, everybody bitches because they didn't think it needed to be had anyway, because the engines were developed so good. They really don't need it anyway.
Well, people that live in the southernmost part of California don't like black smoke. So here we are.
Yeah, my dad was there during the 60s and 70s, and yeah, he remembered what it was like before all that stuff. And that was when the emissions first round went through
Yep.
back in California. So I understood reasons why it was done, and I still didn't like it.
Well, it's interesting with diesel because people don't think about emissions in gas vehicles because you can't see the emissions, right? The only reason it's a giant huge problem and has brought the diesel industry to the point where these like the new trucks and the new equipment with this, like, I think they're actually at tier 5, believe it or not, which just rolled around like a year ago maybe. Like the engines are producing like they're actually like cleaning the air now. And the only reason we had to get to that extreme is because Karen doesn't like fucking black smoke rolling out the stacks. But I mean,
And the thing was, it wasn't the big semis that people were bothered by. It was the smaller pickups that got smoked out, that smoked out their Mercedes Benzes and stuff.
guilty as charged. Guilty as charged. But yeah, I mean, obviously there's emissions, but diesel, from what I understand, diesel emissions just in a normal diesel engine are way less than a gas engine.
Yeah, for the most part. And from what I understand now, and I've done the experiment before of taking off certain pipes and running the engine without it and leaving certain things hooked up and letting the engine run. I think it hardly soots at all. It's amazing at how good they don't soot for as clean. It's ironically enough, from when I saw it, they run almost as clean as a 60 series, if not better, without the emission stuff on it.
Well, I mean, if you think about it, the cylinder temperatures, if you have a high enough cylinder temperature, you're not going to get as much black smoke. So Isuzu kind of had a little bit different approach with the emissions initially. And yeah, and because they didn't have even their final tier 4s originally, I do not believe had DPF and the death stuff. And what they did is they played with the cylinder temperatures, because obviously, if you have low cylinder temperatures, you're going to create less NOx, but you're going to have way more soot and particulate matter you need to filter out. But if you raise that cylinder temperature way up, you're going to have way less soot, but you're going to create a lot of NOx. And I know that Isuzu played with EGR coolers, and they had the last engine I worked on that was an Isuzu had 6 EGR coolers on it. Yeah, but they were lowering those cylinder temperatures, so they had less NOx and they didn't need to run DEF. And I thought that was interesting. Obviously, they can't get away with that anymore. The standards are just too tight for them to be able to get away with that. But yeah, regardless of whether or not the engine had emissions. But
yeah, exactly. Which I thought was kind of stupid, but I didn't make the rules.
I had one customer with a deleted excavator that I worked on, and although the guy that deleted it he probably could have done a better job programming it. That thing, it was the same thing. It didn't hardly smoke. I was out there in the work pile because I was working on it and I had to test it, digging for 30 minutes, and it didn't puff like those old machines, right? That puff just fucking roll out smoke. It didn't do that. Yep, but it is what it is. I don't think we're going to be able to convince the EPA that we don't need that, so.
Well, and of course, here recently they got their hands slapped, and a lot of people are allowed to delete their systems now. At least according to the Supreme Court, they can't enforce that rule. From what I've heard, I don't know if that's actually on the books yet or not. But
I heard that there's companies for diesel pickups and stuff that do deletes and do tunes and stuff like that are getting in trouble. I actually heard that. Yes, I was just gonna bring up Diesel Brothers because they were deleting shit and they got publicly in trouble for that, which I guarantee you, if you go into their shop right now, they've got deleted shit. That's just not something they show on their TV show anymore.
Yeah, they don't discuss it. They did discuss the EPA fine and stuff like that, and that was over a year ago. But right after that, and he wasn't the only one. There are quite a few independent companies out there, especially Arizona, Utah, all those guys. They all got in trouble, and from what I gathered on a different other podcasts that I've listened to, that yeah, they got fined and all that stuff. And the reason why that when that happened, a whole bunch of people complained, and then that's why the EPA got their hands slapped, because everybody thought that was kind of excessive. That was a bunch of crap, and it really didn't hurt anything. And everybody, I'm hoping that's the reason why the Supreme Court said, no, enough's enough. You've overreached.
Well, if you think about it, all these new trucks getting sold. 90% of the people that buy these new trucks are never going to pay 10 grand to get that thing deleted. It's not going to be the only, like, honestly, most of the people that don't want to deal with emissions have what I have. They have 20-year-old trucks that just don't have it in the first place. And, I know that my parents bought a brand new, the fucking Nissan with the Cummins in it. Because it's actually a V8. It is. It's a small V8, but it's a V8, which why the fuck Cummins decided to do a V8 when the inline works so great? I would have rather seen the 4-cylinder in that. I would have rather seen it in line 4. But, it's whatever. I don't think that people with, people like that are familiar with diesels understand the torque that you gain from having an inline 6, which is the whole freaking point of having a diesel. And the V8s are better for horsepower ratings, not torque ratings. But, they were talking the other day about deleting it, and they're like, oh, we want to delete it. We want to be cool. I'm like, unless you're willing to work on that yourself, or you've got a really good mechanic that can do that tune for you and can guarantee that work and work on it, you better not fucking delete that thing, because the dealership won't touch it.
Yep, that's exactly right. Because we had that in a semi industry, surprisingly enough. Well, it's more notorious further south you go. We had a truck come in when I worked for MHC that had been deleted down in Mexico. Well, there was no programming done.
Oh, Lord.
So they drove it from Mexico all the way up to Waco, and they got stuck, and they asked us to fix it. We're like, okay, thinking it's just a regular old truck. And of course, we get into it. We see all the codes and stuff. We're like, yeah, something's wrong with the DPF. This thing's not heating up. We don't know why. So we continued to take it apart, and I'm the guy working on it. I'm like, all right, this is cool. Wow, this has been taken apart before. Huh, I wonder where that was. Oh, that's unplugged. That's not supposed to be like that. Okay, let's continue. Take it apart. And they drill holes, and it was in a Kenworth. And
I'm shocked it didn't derate.
It did. That was the thing.
Well, I'm shocked it didn't derate sooner, like immediately leaving the shop.
No, it gives you a little bit of time before it decides it wants to eat you. So it'll make sure you make it 300 miles away from the shop before it dies. So I take it apart, and they drilled holes in the DPF. Oh, and we're like, okay, well, there's your problem. Sorry, we can't do nothing about it. We had dealt with customers before that deleted their stuff, and we worked on their trucks and kind of gave them a little bit of a deal, but we weren't allowed to touch the exhaust system, which is fine with us, because if we have to touch it or replace anything, we got to replace everything. Yeah, we got to bring it back to stock. And we told this, sorry, we can't do nothing for you. You can either pay us to put it all, throw it all in the truck and go down the road, or you can pay us to replace it all, because we can't let you leave. Yep. We know it's an issue now. We've already put our money into it. We can either stop right now, we throw all the parts in the truck, you can drag it out of here and call it a day, or if you want it fixed, we have to replace everything. That's 10, 12 grand right now. At least. And he's like, yeah. And he's like, oh, he threw a fit, all walleye fit, and just told us to fix. And I'm like, nah, dude, we have no choice. We're a dealership. We have to comply with these rules. Yep. If you went down and blow schmo down the street and have it looked at, he could do whatever he wants. Us, on the other hand, we're required by rules to replace all that stuff. We can't just let you walk out.
Yep. The guy that with that deleted excavator tried to do the same thing. Well, similar. He was having a lot of issues with, at first it was the fan drive motor and shit, which obviously I'm going to work on that. That has nothing to do with your delete. So I fixed that. And I did some AC work on it, some hydraulics shit here and there. And, he kept having this, like it was the turbo outlet temperature too high. Turbo outlet temperature or something. It was something like that. that's actually a calculated value. That is not a sensor. That is a calculated value from, you know, the chart or the aftercooler temperature sensors and like a couple of the EGR sensors. Like there's like 4 different sensors that helped for this calculated measure. And I'm looking at it, I'm like, bro, one of the sensors. Now I can sit here and try to diagnose 3 of these sensors, but you do have 2 of them that are intentionally unplugged because it's deleted. So I can't diagnose this. And like, well, I don't fucking understand. I don't know why not. I'm like, well, first off, if it has anything to do with the sensor that is supposed to be plugged in, I can't get into your ECU. I can't reprogram your ECU. If I try to reprogram your ECU, this thing ain't leaving the shop because it's going to immediately know that all the stuff is gone. Yeah. And I'm like, I can't, you're going to have to take this back to your tuner. And he argued with us for 2 months about that. And then finally he took it back to his tuner and he's like, you were right, he fixed it. I'm like, yeah, I know. Unfortunately, my hands are tied with some of this stuff.
Yeah. And that's the thing about working with a dealer and stuff like that, and working with an independent shop. Yeah. Dealers don't have a lot of leeway in being an independent.
We weren't even supposed to have that in the shop. We weren't even supposed to accept that as that customer, but we were scraping for work because we were having a hard time finding work, so we worked on it.
That was one of those things that a lot of the dealerships ran into, especially out here in Texas, because out here in Texas, we don't care about the EPA emission stuff. Certain cities, Houston, San
Wyoming
Antonio,
doesn't care
Austin,
either.
Dallas, and we're like, we don't care. If you live in a city, yeah, they care. But out here in the country, they don't care. Like 9 times out of 10, I have yet to see anybody get pulled over and smog tested.
Oh yeah, nobody in Wyoming gets smog tested. There isn't even emissions in Wyoming. Like the whole state just said, fuck that. We're not doing that.
When you only have a couple thousand in the state, makes sense.
Wyoming has a population of, I think, between 500,000 and 600,000 people in the entire state. The city limits of Denver, Colorado are bigger than that. But that's great. That's what I love about Wyoming. Yep. Oh, and hunting is great there. They take care, Wyoming takes care of their residents. We have the constitutional carry, which Indiana does now too, but Wyoming's had it forever. Is a constitutional carry, which means it doesn't matter if it's a pistol or rifle or whatever the case may be, you can conceal carry a loaded gun anywhere you want besides obviously federal buildings. And it's legal as long as you are a resident of Wyoming. You know? No emissions, no state income tax.
Yeah. Oh, and then the lovely winters and the high winds.
I had a Facebook memory pop up the other day of a couple years ago, 2020 actually, when we got like 38 inches of snow in like 5 hours along with 60-mile-an-hour winds, and it blew the interstate closed. Well, I mean, it took me like 4 days to get out of my driveway. Because I lived out of town, and it took me and my neighbors like 4 days to get out with a backhoe and an old county plow truck and a skid steer. But it blew the interstate closed to the point where they had to send out road graders and loaders to move the snow out of the interstate. So yeah, that was cool.
It's always the classic pictures of, sleeping trucks in their natural environment.
Yeah, oh yeah. There's a video on I-80 of a state trooper that had someone pulled over. So he was sitting on the side of the road and like his cam on his car like watched a semi blow over. That's a normal occurrence. That happens all the time. Well, people don't listen. They don't read to the sign. There are giant signs all over the interstate that says closed to light high profile vehicles. And then it tells you 80+ mile-an-hour winds. If you're an empty semi, that means you, bro. But shit, even trying to haul a horse trailer or something like that on those days is sketchy.
Even box trucks are just as bad. They don't weigh as much either. We worked on those over at Penske, and I was like, Yeah, that's insane. Those things are just scary to drive in their own right, even without wind. You get out there in 30-mile-an-hour winds, that's kind of sketchy.
Yeah, I'd rather have a trailer. But all right, so back to the normal topic. Um, the emissions thing and trying to get a grip on that. Did your shops, did they pay for you guys to go to training to try to learn this? Was that like through your shop that they paid you guys to go and try and learn it? Or were you guys just kind of thrown to the wolves and you were like, figure it out?
Well, in the beginning, of course, everybody was kind of throwing the wolves in it. And later on, a few years down the road, when they started, see, and there in the beginning, there really weren't training classes available, at least to independents like Penske Truck Leasing and stuff like that. So all the dealerships were getting their people up to speed on it, and they had all their online stuff. Which I joined dealership later, Rush, Trucking and MHC,
Mm-hmm.
and they paid for my education. Penske paid for some of it to go learn about a little bit of it. Theirs was a more basic overview, while the dealership, they got us. I went through a lot of Cummins program and Diagnostic, and yeah, they paid me to sit there and sit on a computer, fill out slides, and take tests.
Yep.
And so I was like, it wasn't really a bad deal, a good learning experience. And ironically enough, even though I've been in ever since that started, it's what, 15 years later, 13 years later. And there's still a lot of people out there that still don't have a good grasp of what to do with the system.
Oh yeah. Well, I mean, as you know, being a mechanic, you're constantly learning. You know, anybody that says they're not learning anymore, they know everything is obviously just the lube guy, right? Like there's no way they're working on everything else. You know, it took me even a while, even like kind of in a sense growing up into the emissions and learning it. You know, I even then like John Deere's initial after treatments had lots of issues, but you know, we started getting into the new ones, and for the most part, they really didn't. The biggest issues we had were things like skid steers that weren't ran at full capacity all the time, and or you know, with the occasion that a DPF was poisoned from coolant or oil, but for the most part, you know, even then, I grew up in this, and even then, I'd catch myself trying to diagnose something, but you learn the hard way, right? Like, you know, I've always known the theory behind passive regen, active regen, parked regen, and a service regen. I've always known the general basis behind all of those. And I understand how the systems work pretty well. But it is a completely different animal when you are out on a field call or whatever and you're plugged into this machine and you cannot figure out why it's not going into regen. And or you know, I actually caught myself during this is I thought it wasn't going into regen, and you know, I was sitting there watching the computer because John Deere doesn't have like, if you click, you know, I want to do a parked regen or whatever the case may be, it doesn't, or a service regen, it doesn't really tell you. It just says you can now disconnect the computer. It will, then you can choose if you want it to shut the machine off after the regen. And because some of these regions, like a service or like a service regen, can take hours, like 4 to 6 hours. And I sat out on an excavator one point in time, which there was something messed up with it originally, and I fixed it. And at first I didn't think I fixed it because I'm looking at the computer and it's not doing anything, and it keeps asking for a regen. I'm like, what the hell? Well, I wasn't watching the temperatures correctly. And I didn't actually, as much as I'd spent years and years and years at this point in the classes for after treatment and all that stuff, I never fully understood the numbers of what I'm supposed to expect in the exhaust temperatures and stuff like that to know that it's actually in a regen. So I sat there for, obviously because service regions take forever and parked regions take forever. I sat there for hours, like looking at this thing, not understanding, like I don't understand why it's not going into regen. Why is it not going into regen? You know, the air intake valve's not opening, the exhaust temperatures aren't getting high. What's going on? Well, I didn't actually understand that what I was expecting these numbers to do was a park regen, not a service regen. Because I'm looking for, I'm smart enough to try to look for it, the fuel dosing, the intake valve percentage, all this shit. None of that was happening. And I'm like, what is going on? Yeah. Well, long story short, one of the smarter mechanics ended up figuring, well, we had like a in-house dealer assistant guy that would help with technical stuff, and I talked to him, and it took him about 5 minutes of me reading off the numbers to tell me that, Melissa, it's fine, it's doing a regen, just leave it, it's fine.
Right. See, and that was going back to learning about this. There in the beginning, yeah, we were confused, but the guys were sitting there, old guys that I was talking to, when they threatened to quit when OBD2 came out. They're, yeah. And I heard those stories. I'm like, man, that's crazy. And now we had and of course, a year later, go down the road and people were getting pissed off and threatening to quit the industry because of the emission stuff and all those computers that were being put on these trucks. So not surprising. So I got a taste of that and I just stayed in it. And they're like, after a few years of being into it, people were saying, there's no way you can leave this industry and expect to remember everything and come back into it in 5 years and expect to know everything. There's just no way. Back in the day, you could do that. Nowadays, you can't, because I left for a couple of years of not seeing any of that stuff. I worked for independent companies that didn't really deal with it for a couple of years, and now I'm kind of doing it by myself. If I want to go back to a dealership, everything's changed already again.
Yep.
And then even using this new diagnostic software, these laptops, and helping me figure out all this new stuff, because I was still on the tier 4 stuff when I learned, and they were just bringing out tier 5 when I quit working at a dealership and dealing with these newer trucks. And so now with these newer trucks that I've got, and it's tier 5, I'm like, we're higher up, whatever it is, and I'm like, what? All the numbers that I used to look for aren't there. It's not reading the right pressures. I'm like, well, why is this thing still messed up? It looking fine. It passed all the tests. What the crap?
Yeah.
Well, yeah, now they got all kinds of things of, like, it's not just the differential pressure to figure out if the filter's clogged, right? There's differential pressure, but by the way, there's 3 different kinds of differential pressure. There's time-based, there's fuel-based, and then there's pressure-based. And yeah.
The ash load is our biggest issue. The temperatures may look right, and it progresses through the system just fine, and then throw NOx on top of it.
Yeah.
And there in the beginning, when it first came out for DD15, when you sat there and regen the long regen, service regen, we had a regen that sat out in our parking lot and did it for 2 days. It regened 8 hours straight. We're like, there is something wrong. And it was, like I said, it was that first generation with a lot of bugs in it. And we're like, what in the crap is going on? So we did it twice. And then we took apart the system. It was a new truck. It was 100,000 miles on it. We're like, what is the deal? Took it apart. We burned a hole for the DPF filter. It had gotten too hot. And this computer didn't kick itself out. We're like, what the?
Yeah.
How is this possible? We didn't even think that was possible. But no, sure enough, it burned a hole right down the middle of it. We're like, what the hell? This is crazy. So yeah, it's going from that kind of stuff to doing the stuff now with the DPF, the DEF, DPF, SER system. And our biggest issue the other time was the crystallization in the SER system, where big balls of death. We're like, what the crap? And of course, it was always the nozzle or the DPF metering valve or DEF metering valve or pump. It was just a constant aggravation of fighting, and then getting the smell of ammonia on you from that death stuff. You go home and just smell like it, even though you wash yourself like 10 times.
Yeah. Well, it makes your skin feel gross. Coolant and DEF are just And fuel, diesel fuel, I have eczema, and it's just something that those two things, I could take a bath in hydraulic oil and be fine, but DEF and fuel and coolant are just, no, thank you.
Well, it's always lovely when you're sitting under something and you're taking def lines off and that stuff runs down your arm, into your shirt, into your armpit. You're like, oh, coolant, same way. It's like, ugh. You just want to change right there. Just like, no, I'm done. It's just nasty. And and who's this? Everybody says, like, what, asbestos back in the day. Everybody's, no, it's fine. You can take a bath and then you'll be okay. 15 years later, for 15 years from now, everybody will say that crap is bad for you and gives you all sorts of health problems. That's what we were all debating that there in the beginning when they first brought it out. Like, how safe is this stuff really? Like, or should we really be concerned? I don't think we want to mess with this too much.
Yeah, well, I've watched mechanics clean their hands off with brake clean. So it's like, that's asking for, do you want skin cancer? Because that's what you're, I just wear gloves because, like, back to how I have eczema. You know, it's not necessarily that I mind having my hands dirty, and obviously when it's hot and I'm sweating and I rip every single pair of gloves I try to put on, I'm over it. I'm just gonna not wear gloves. But you know, my dad has skin cancer still, and he told, like, he's a logger and he's worked on all his own machines for a long time, and he told me he's almost 100% certain it's from working on shit and getting the oil and the grease and the dirt and the brake clean and shit like that in it on his skin, and he's pretty sure that's why he got skin cancer. So he was on me all the time about wearing gloves. And you know, now they're coming up with, you know, better, like, green solutions for, you know, parts cleaner tanks and stuff like that, but it's, I don't know.
Well, and that's
You're gonna die
another part of our
eventually.
industry.
So
Yeah, that's another part of our industry that a lot of people kind of forget about is the health of it. There's a reason why kind of my last job that I was at, and it was interesting point of I've been doing it for so long, and of course growing up on a dairy as a kid, being a farm kid, stuff like that, always being around mechanics, and then getting to the age I am now. It's the things you don't think about as a kid, 20 years old, 25 years old, lifting, thinking you're all tough and invincible and stuff.
Especially the men, no offense.
Yeah. And it's come to bite me here in my later years. My health has suffered because of my lack of proper safety in dealing with certain chemicals and even just lifting stuff continuously and repetitively. It basically, an injury, I had created a nerve injury in my neck because I was looking up so much sitting under a truck, and it just progressively got worse, and it finally got so bad to where it pinched the nerve in my arm. I couldn't lift anything anymore. It was just so painful, and I'm like, this is why I swore to myself when I first got into it, I'm not going to become one of those old crippled guys taking 10 medications a day just to make it to work, working on the floor. I was like, nah, by the time I'm 35, I better be running a shop or I'm just going to quit doing it. This is, I am not going to end up like that 60-year-old guy hobbling around.
Yeah, that's had 3 knee replacements and a hip replacement and a back problems, and he's still wobbling around the shop. Yeah.
And his hands are the size of freaking baseball gloves because they're just all arthritic and stuff like that. And I'm like, no. And yeah, after I got myself hurt and had that injury, I'm like, yeah, I've got to figure out something else to do. But that's the nature of the beast. And our health is, if we want to continue to do it and continue to learn and make money doing this job, the number one thing that everybody even getting into it, or people that are in the middle of it now, really watch yourself.
Work smarter, not harder. Use the tools that are given to you as an aid.
Yeah, and like kids, they'd use tire bars. They wouldn't use even though it was provided, they'd get a little tire dolly thing, putting tires on semis and stuff. Well, and I started using those tools as I was getting older. I was like, wow, this is kind of nice and convenient. Yeah, it's kind of irritating to have a tool because it's bulky and in the way, but at the same time, it saved me a lot of struggle, pain, and effort. And that's what a lot of these kids nowadays need to really start focusing on and understanding, like, hey, yeah, you drop something on your foot and it's sore for a while, but years later that could come to bite you in the ass, because you may have feet problem after that.
Yep.
Because I've fallen off of stuff, I've listed stuff wrong, I've thrown my back out a number of times, hit my head.
Oh God. Yep, been there.
Hit my back on stuff, gotten electrocuted. I'm like, ugh. All those little things add up and make into bigger things.
Well, and they could be avoided, right? If you're not in such a rush, or you paid more attention, or you're wearing the proper equipment. Obviously, accidents happen. I've had stitches 3 times from being in this industry, and my knees are shot because, the old guy in the shop telling me to stop jumping off the pieces of equipment. I was like, I'll be fine. Obviously, I'm not fine. I have knee issues now, but, even though I haven't been in the industry for 7 months, I still, like, with lifting and stuff like that, I've got knee issues, and I'm pretty sure it's from not only walking on a concrete floor for 10 hours a day every day for 7 years, but it was also the jumping off pieces of equipment, little things like, you don't think, you're jumping off tracks that are this high. You're like, oh, it's fine. It's fine. They'll be fine. No, it's not fine. He was right.
Yeah, that was the thing I was always told. Quit. Yeah, you're a young kid. You don't need to jump off stuff. Just crawl down. Well, it's faster to jump down. Well, you're not realizing what you're doing. Okay, whatever. Yeah, years later, I started jumping up. I kept doing it and doing it. And the first time I noticed it was a problem is when I landed on my feet and my foot went numb, and I pinched a nerve and almost made me buckle to my knees because it hurt so bad. And it was just like irritating. It was like a heel burr or something that just made my feet hurt. I was like, golly, what the hell? And it's kind of solve a problem with good footwear. Good footwear in a shop environment is always key. Soft shoes, good shoes, not those cheap, junky ones the company tries to provide for you.
If you pay under $100 for your work boots, they are not proper work boots. I spend $350 on Red Wings because I get the good insoles, right? The custom insoles, and obviously, well, technically Irish setter because I don't like the. Yeah, but it's sold by Red Wing, and I bought my first pair of those when I was in Wyotech, going on 8 years ago, and I have bought the exact same pair, pretty much the exact same pair for the last 7 years, and I swear by those things. It's worth it. It is so worth it.
It is worth it, and I wear them until there are holes in the sides before I get rid of them.
Mine usually last like 1.5 years, 2 years. And that's with, like, I'm not a clean mechanic, right? So I'm getting oil on them all the time. And, I'm constantly kicking shit because they're steel toes and it's just a habit to kick shit, right? And, yep. I've got, like, the steel, but I get, like, the coating you can put over the toe of your shoes. I started doing that after my first pair because I wore a hole through my shoe into that steel. Or the composite, whatever it is. I think they were actually steel. But yeah, you see these guys walking around the shop with Walmart work boots, and, they're coming apart, the soles are fucked, it doesn't look comfortable, and they're always complaining that their feet hurt. It's like, well, yeah, bro. The company pays for up to $100 or $150 for work boots. Go buy yourself a pair of good work boots, because even if you had to pay the full $350 or, $250 or whatever, if you don't get the fancy insoles and the toe covering, it's worth it. That's $250, even if they only last a year, per year, right? That's completely worth the cost.
It's a year of being pain-free on your feet.
Yep.
And that makes a giant difference, because if you're in pain all day, you don't work as efficiently.
I agree.
And it's just not comfortable. No one wants to work all day in pain. No. And yeah, that was the same logic that I'd come to early on, is that the first 2 years when I was a young dumb kid having work boots, it just didn't work for me because I always had sore feet, and I finally bit the bullet, went out and bought some decent work boots, and I've been able to work on my feet for a long time. just because of decent work boots. I know when my feet start to hurt again, it's either get a new pair of boots, a new pair of insoles.
Yep. My dad kind of beat that into my head because he buys, as a logger, you spend a lot of time on your feet, and a majority of his career was actually spent running a chainsaw by hand, so hand falling. And even when he was working in machines, he surveyed all of the timber sales and stuff that they were working on, because he had to figure out how to properly move this operation along that was the most efficient way given the landscape. And he swore by whites. That's what he buys, is whites. And those are like $400 a pair, which I'm not going to go quite that far, but he's got ones with the little spikes that you can thread into the holes in the bottom, like log spikes. And he's got a pair of summer boots that are non-insulated, and then he's got a pair of winter boots that have the removable insulation stuff in it. And that's what he told me. He's like, you need to invest in good work boots. And so that's what I've been doing for my entire career, is I wear the almost identical pair of Irish setters.
Yeah, see, and I have the same set, actually, ironically enough, and they've always been that's been my staple boot for a number of years now, is the Irish setter Red Wings. They are kind of on the expensive side, but I like the slip-ons. The only disadvantage is when you're welding or torching, hot ash, hot embers, and slag tend to drop down the top of your boot, but it's better than burning your lace.
Yeah. Well, you can get Red Wing sells those leather laces now that are like fire resistant laces, which is what I like to buy, because I have the lace up ones. Women's work boots, obviously, we have like 3 options in the whole store, right? You have the really, really light pair of Red Wings, which is stupid. I don't know why. It's gonna be stained with black patches in a day. So it's either that, then you have like the short red Irish setter, like lace ups, where you have the tall heel. And I've been buying the tall heel lace ups for forever, and I get the toe coated, and I've actually never burned through laces. My ex that I had like the higher boots that were lace up, that were Red Wing, and he burned through a couple laces welding and torching, but I never did. I never had an issue with that. I had more of an issue with getting sparks and shit down my shirt than I did getting them on I learned very quickly. I learned this cutting off a butter bar from an excavator, which anybody that knows about butter bars and excavators, usually that involves welding an old cutting edge, to the teeth, which is hardened steel. So it's not going to cut for shit, right? Hardened steel isn't cut for shit. And the first time I tried cutting a butter bar off, I got like spark shower. And that's when I learned that I should button my shirt all the way up as high as it goes. And then I have a big leather welding jacket that I wear. And I do that because that sucks.
Yeah, that was the one thing. And I always tell the guys, the number one issue I had working with dealers is their cheap uniforms. That nylon polyester.
Yes, I agree.
All right, now go over there and cut this stuff up. Why? Because you need to. I don't have the right shirt for that. What are you talking about? Just go over and cut it up. If you want me to catch myself on fire.
Yeah.
Uniforms at a dealerships is cheap stuff, and I've burned holes through it. I've almost caught myself on fire a few times. Like, what are you doing? Why don't you supply us with better uniforms and stuff like that? You're paying us quite a bit of money, but spend some money on some decent uniforms for once. But no, I never did. All they do is provide washing. Hey,
it's better than washing shit in your own washer. I've done that. It turns black rapidly.
Yes, it does. That's why I always had a spare washing machine just for my nasty clothes.
I learned from my dad with his rigging pants and stuff and his work clothes that home washer is for normal clothes, and if you want to wash your other clothes, you take it to a cleaning, like, laundry mat thing and wash it there.
Yeah, that's what we had to do quite a few times, especially when I was working in the field. And I was, yeah, washing clothes for being a diesel mechanic. Golly, that's nasty.
Hey, scrub it with Dawn dish soap and stick it in the washer and pray. That's all you can do. And then it's most of the time it's permanently stained, but that's why you have work clothes that are only dedicated for that.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And my preferred uniform now is just an FR welding shirt and blue jeans. And I don't have an issue, sort of like I did burn a hole because I have a slip-on Irish setters,
Mhm.
and I put my pants over the boot and burned a hole through the top of it. So into my pants, and that hole goes right down the center of my boot, and I didn't realize it the day I was doing it. All of a sudden my feet started getting hot, and I was like, oh man, I had to take
Yeah.
my boots off because so much slag had dropped down there. I was like, ooh, that hurt.
Yeah, and by the time it gets down there, it's definitely just gonna burn you and it's gonna scar and yeah.
And you're going to be uncomfortable the rest of the day.
Yep. Trust me, try getting burns in your bra line and then it's rubbing all. It's fucking horrible. It's horrible. Like I said, I did that one time, and I'm like, ever since then, and every now and then I still had issues with it. But if I was gonna go cut something, I would like, as high as I can, button that shit up.
No, it's that and the hair. It's the smelling of burning hair is always.
I haven't burnt my hair. I have not ever had an issue with hair, but yeah, everybody always asks me that because I used to have like really, really long extensions and stuff like that. And I don't understand how you work. You got to get that caught in a creeper or something. I'm like, worked in this industry long enough to know how to not do that. Trust me, I'm fine. Never burnt it.
Recent thing, I never had my hair this long, so.
What I did when I was welding is I'd like pull it, I'd slick it back, which yours isn't long enough to do this, but I'd slick it back and put it in a bun, and then I'd put a welding cap on or a normal hat backwards to keep slag from falling down, and then a welding hood, and I even when I was torching, I like to use those big green face shields, and then I just put a hat backwards and put my hair in a bun, and that people don't understand that. They see that like I have one picture that I have my fucking hair in a long ponytail. Like you realize like I'm not stupid, right? Like if I'm in a creeper, I'm gonna like tuck my hair in my bra strap or something, or like put it up better. Or if I'm welding or torching, obviously I'm not gonna be torching with a giant long ponytail in front of what I'm trying to torch. I'm not stupid. That stupid. I'm kind of an idiot sometimes, but I'm not that stupid.
See, with me, it was always, I was sitting under a truck, and I never had any of the face shield stuff or anything like that. I lived kind of dangerously. And I'd be under a truck, and you hit those air pockets, cutting welds and stuff, and
Yeah, but it pops. Yeah, I hate that.
all that crap goes, and you're sitting under it, and it blows up in your face, and all of a sudden I smell first, and then I feel, oh crap, my hair is starting to catch, and my beard be half burnt to crap. The top of my head would be a little bit burnt, but of course it was shorter then. And I was like, oh, trying to put myself out, make sure I didn't catch myself on fire. And of course, then you got to live with a burnt hair smell the whole day.
Have you ever used a thermal lance or an air arc?
No, I have yet to have that level of experience because everybody I worked for was too cheap to buy them.
So, I mean, if you're working on semis, it's probably not as common to use, but thermal lances were used for pins, for gouging out the center of pins. And what a thermal lance does and how it works is you hook it to a battery for electricity, and then you hook an oxygen bottle to it. And it's got this big, long, like copper looking electrode thing that you put into a gun, kind of just like an arc welder looking thing, only it's got oxygen that goes through it. It's like a gun. And you strike it on a ground, which obviously the positive is hooked to your thermal lance, the negative is hooked to whatever you're trying to lance out. And the first time I did this, I had an old welder guy at the first shop I worked at teach me. And he gives me this big leather jacket, like cowhide straight up leather jacket thing. And he says, okay, you need to put this on. I'm like, this feels a little excessive. Like, I know how to use a torch and a welder. I'll be fine. He's like, no, you need this. And he made me put a big blanket over the windshield of a grater, the grater that I was working on. And he's like, all right, strike it and then just drive it through. I'm like, I got this. It'll be fine. Well, I struck that arc and I started shoving that into the pin. And what I was not prepared for was the lava that comes out of the center, because it blows. There's nowhere for it to go because you're driving into a pin. It blows right back in your face. I'm like, I am so glad I listened to him and have this leather jacket on right now.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I've blown pins out with regular torches. That sucks.
That sucks. That takes forever.
Yeah, and then cutting freaking that 1-inch steel, 3/4 steel with just a regular torch and trying to find the biggest tip possible and turning up all your bottles and trying to get it as clean. I'm like, that was so painful doing that in the field because that's all we had. So you're supposed to weld pieces of equipment together. And that was one company I had a lot of welding done, that I worked on a lot of welding. It was a power line company. And they had a Watson drill rig that had a 10-foot auger on it with reamer bars on it. And I had to build boxes for the reamer bars for this auger so they can get just a little bit more out of it. And yeah, that was a lot of cutting with 1-inch steel, a lot of welding with it. And by any means, I'm not an expert at any of that stuff. I'm not a welder by trade or anything. So I cobbled it together good enough. And as far as I know, that thing is, all that stuff that I welded is still there.
Yep. I wouldn't claim to be a professional welder either, but I can do enough to get my job done. The last welding job I did was for the last shop I worked at. I had an excavator that, typical sales job, right? They're like, you need to put this thumb on this excavator. It's like, well, this thumb's not even for this excavator. So instead of getting the right thumb, we cut the pin bosses off of this thumb and had them relocated to center them, right? And then you had to re-weld them, which we didn't cut them off. We had a company air arc that off. And then I welded it. And so I had to run root passes. Obviously, like I did a root pass with dual shield. And then, because you can get it really hot, we had really thick gauge wire for our MIG welder for the dual shield. So I did the root passes in that. Unfortunately, I did not get to do the cover passes, but that was a learning experience because that metal was really fucking thick, like you're saying, and you got to preheat it. And if you don't preheat it right, it can't really be too hot or too cold, or it's got to be even. And yeah, the preheating to get those welds to really penetrate was a challenge, but I got it. I mean, I did it. And as far as I know, that's still everything I've ever welded, as far as I still know, is good. The most proud moment I've ever had of welding, and this is going to be stupid because it's such a stupidly small thing, is we were working on the first shop I worked at. We were an 870 bucket cylinder, which, for those of you that do not know what an 870 is, an 870G excavator is an 87 metric ton excavator. So it's pretty big motherfucker. And we had a bucket cylinder, and it had a nut on that piston that was like this big. And we took it off. It was loose, I believe. Because we've had issues like that with excavators where the nut is not actually tight. And it'll sit there and vibrate, and it'll actually completely fuck up all the threads. This one, I don't think got to that point. I don't remember the whole story about how we got it apart. But what I do remember is putting it back together. And I had to weld a socket for this thing out of flat stock to hydraulically torque that nut, which is 15,000 foot-pounds, by the way. Like some insane number. I think it was 15,000 foot-pounds is what it was supposed to be torqued to, which ended up being like in the thousands of the PSI rating that you were supposed to, because obviously it goes by PSI when you're torquing hydraulically. And I welded a socket together, and me and my boss at the time, actually Troy, who's been on this podcast, we welded that together. Well, I welded it, and that torqued the nut to 15,000 and it didn't break. And I was so proud of that. I'm like, if that's not a tensile strength test of your welds, I don't know what is, because we were like running the hydraulic cylinder with a remote standing as far away from this thing as possible because did not have high expectations of that, but well,
Of course, and that works. And we had to do the same. I had to this last job working on a truck, we had to repair a cracked frame on a truck, and everybody's all sorts of worried. Oh, we got to do this, and it wasn't as complicated as we made it out to be. But yeah, doing that preheating, welding, thick stuff, insane amount of time taken.
Well, especially with frame rails too, because you can't just run a single bead. You got to do it in pieces, or you'll warp it.
Yep, and that was the thing that I see, and that's where my brother come in very handy. He was a professional welder by trade, and did it for almost 20 years now. And he did anywhere from building buildings to working pipelines. So this guy knew it well.
Yeah.
And so we had him come out there and do it. I watched him do it, and I was like, yeah, it's from what I was taught. It was all the same thing. He taught me how to do it. I just don't have the technique down. So he did it, and it looks fine. As far as I know, so far, that truck's still going down the road.
Yeah. We learned frame rail modifications. I actually took, not a lot of people know this, but when I was in chassis fab, I took motorsports. When I was in Wyotech, I took motorsports and chassis fabrication as an elective because it had MIG welding and plasma cutting and TIG welding. Actually, I can TIG weld. And that was one of the things we learned was frame rail modifications, because there's a whole way of doing it. Like, you can't just cut it in half and weld it back together. You got to do like fish mouths, and you got to do, cover plates to do it right. And there's a certain way you need to cut it apart to make sure it's the strongest. And then obviously, like we just covered, you can't just weld it all in one go, or you run a risk of warping it. So you got to run a little bit, let it cool, and then run a little bit and let it cool. And yeah, that was interesting.
You have to do your cool and heat up cycles, so it won't twist when you get everything together.
Yep.
All the different things you learn in the mechanic industry is kind of amazing. Everybody, it is in its own right a jack of all trades. And we work with diesel engines for the most part, but there's everything that goes into it. Ag industry, you have a whole lot more hydraulics. Trucks, it's a lot of road safety, a lot of rules and regulations you have to follow.
Yep.
And safety deals, and a lot of torque specs you got to deal with, and keeping engines together, just like anything. Our main thing is just safety on the road and high speed, which for automotive and class 8 trucks, it seems easy, but sometimes it's really not.
The dealership that I worked at they were also a dealership for Grove and Manitowoc cranes. And I've actually certified to inspect cranes, but that's, those are kind of the same way with the safety aspect of them, because, when you're running a crane like that and you're lifting heavy components, you got to make sure everything is functioning correctly and right, and you know what you're doing, because you will kill people if it's not right. Same thing with over-the-road trucks. That thing gets out of control, or it wrecks, or something happens, you're good possibility you might kill someone.
Well, not only kill someone, but kill a lot of other people in the process. It's more along the lines of ruining other equipment in this process. It's one thing when you destroy just one piece of equipment. It's the other equipment that gets hurt, and other people that get hurt. I've worked on cranes, Groves, and the Manitowoc's truck mounts, and just regular run around
Nationals.
Old Grove. Nationals and stuff like that. And we had an Old Grove from a 72.
Oh, Jesus.
And I mean, I had 2 of them. These things were ancient, an 80 ton and a 60 ton. and they blew up the engine in one of them, had to replace it. That was an interesting ordeal because I had never worked on cranes before. So that was a fresh, interesting start for me. And replace that, and then all the safety mechanisms, the wiring. I mean, yeah, it was basic as anything, but it was still complicated because there's just wires everywhere. And of course, with old equipment, you have everybody else's repairs in there, jumping
Yep.
around safety things and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And you're like, holy Moses, this is amazing. Somebody even expected this stuff to make it pass.
Yeah, I was always super anal about my inspections. And, you know, I had a couple customers like United Rentals that I knew the shop manager. And I knew if I put something down as a recommendation and not a deficiency, he would fix it. The only time I put something down as a deficiency is if, you know, it was a major, major problem. But, you know, for normal customers that I didn't trust or I didn't know, I would put deficiencies down and they'd get mad and they'd cry and whine. I'm like, dude, I'm not going to be responsible for this crane killing someone or hurting someone. You know, spool your goddamn wire right. You know, it's make sure your cable's spooling correctly. The worst people about that are freaking service truck guys. They don't care. They don't pay attention. They just they got a bird's nest back there. I'm like, that is asking for a problem.
Oh yeah, I know. I've run a couple of cranes in my service trucks before. And oh, when you first get it from somebody else that had no idea what they were doing, like, oh, what the crap? And then they go. So what's even worse is that they don't know what the trips are for their safeties and can't reset it. I'm like, ah. And I've run into, and then you have the ones that are just broken and no one knows how to fix it. They're especially the little wireless remote ones. I've gotten a lot of used stuff out of that, and 9 times out of 10, the wireless remote was broke because those guys would get pissed off and throw it because it wasn't working. I'm like, why throw it? Oh, because it's already broke. No, you probably just broke it worse.
You're right.
I'm like, no, that's why I never got into that crane thing. I didn't do heavy equipment. I just stuck to Class 8 trucks. I was like, yeah, it's a little too risky for me because I'm not exactly a very safe person anyway. I'm probably not the best person to be expecting this stuff.
Yep. I don't know. I've always been kind of anal like that with things. I made a TikTok that actually went viral, close to viral, about this exact problem. Was, you know, I'm anal, right? So when I inspect something, I inspect it fully. And I write everything down. And I will turn it in. And then I will sit at my computer and be like, I really don't want to do half the shit on that list. But I wrote it down. So then you have like this internal battle of like, should I have even written it down? Like, do I really want to fix this? But I'm like, if I don't write this shit down, I'm not going to sleep at night. So I'd rather just suffer through these repairs that I don't want to do. And just because if the customer doesn't approve it, then that's on them. You know, it's their fault. I don't want it to be on me. That's something, and that's even down to just like inspecting loaders and stuff like that. I was super anal about stuff like that. But, well, do you have anything? Yeah, I'm glad we got to cover the safety stuff a little bit. That's a topic that I haven't really covered much. But is there anything else you'd like to add about, you know, safety or after treatment systems and diagnostics or any of that stuff? Is there anything you'd like to cover or add before we kind of wrap this up?
The one thing I always made sure I didn't have when I was married, I had a wedding ring on, and I always made sure and took that stupid thing off.
Don't wear wedding rings.
Don't wear necklaces.
Yeah, no jewelry at all.
No jewelry at all. No, I was never one of those because that was just asking to get hurt.
Well, even though, like, you know, they make ceramic wedding rings, and even that I don't, you know, the only ring that I could get behind people wearing in a shop is just those rubber ones. Because that's not going to hurt anything, right? If it gets caught, it's just going to fucking stretch and rip off. It's not going to crush. You know, yeah, it's like $10 and it's not fancy. But, I mean, if you're insistent on wearing a ring at work, that's probably your best bet.
Yeah, exactly. That was my big thing.
I've watched people and heard horror stories of wedding ring issues.
Oh yeah, I've heard it my whole life, seen pictures of it. In the military, they gave a demonstration, what it does. A lot of safety classes that I took over my years of doing this, it always seems to be the same picture of the same guy getting his finger ripped off. I'm
Yeah.
like, ugh. It is not one of those things you don't really, if you got a weak stomach, don't go looking for it.
Yeah.
Because a lot of people get hurt with stupid, simple stuff like that.
Agreed.
And
Agreed.
as much as we don't like some of the policies that put in place, it is there for a reason, and we should be
Yep.
following it. And as for as lax as I am and not serious about it, it is still serious. A lot of people out there that are watching this should take that to consideration. Like, hey, yeah, it could be you one day sitting
Yeah.
under a truck and your cheap Harbor Freight jack stands decide they want to crap on you, and oops.
Yeah. Well, it's down to things like if you're trying to lift something, don't use a strap that's already like almost cut in half. I've seen guys do that. They're over there trying to lift boom sections in a freaking national with a strap that's half cut the way through. I'm like, are you asking? But this particular person just was like, he was just didn't give a shit. He thought he was invincible. I watched him do that. I watched him drop half of a loader when he was trying to split it onto the ground while he was underneath it. He's fucking lucky that didn't actually get him. And he had a wife and kids at home. It's like, dude, like I understand, like, certain things, maybe not, following everything to a T, but when it comes to like lifting and doing big work and being under these big machines, that's shit that can kill you in an instant. You get something in your eye, it might suck, worst case you lose an eye, but it's not going to kill you. This other shit you're doing is going to fucking kill you. And we don't want to be the ones to have to call your family members and tell them that you died at work.
And that was one of the things I did experience. Is a couple of friends of mine did die while we were on work. We were out in the field, and an accident happened because of lack of safety and lack of, I wouldn't say proper training. It was a lack of situational awareness is what did it.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the bad thing is these guys were warned about this stuff, and it's one thing when no one tells you, but it's a completely different thing when you ignore the rules in the first place.
Yep.
And I lost a couple of friends to that, and like they got overconfident. They were in a hurry, and that's the other thing in our industry that we have to worry about. Along with that, I had a guy I was working with. He was his kid. You knew he didn't hardly know anything. This guy could barely change a tire for as good as he was.
Yeah.
And prime example of that being, he did use a jack stand. He did everything right. The problem is he put it in the wrong spot.
Yep.
Jack slipped, and someone was standing next to the truck when it slipped and it hit the ground. It had the front tire off, but the jacket popped out because he didn't set it right. It popped out from under the truck and it wham, hit the ground. And it was right there in front of the boss's office and everything. You're like, what the crap? No one got written up for it because he did use it. He didn't position it right. It was a firm warning of don't be doing that shit again, kind of.
Well, you got to think about shit like, even down to, things like loaders. You're trying to split it or whatever. There's articulation in that rear end. And the second you undo the front half of that loader that's solid axled, that has a possibility of, so you got to block it up. And I've seen people not block that up, and it's sketchy when those things start tipping, or like, taking axles out. I make sure you use the right jack stands and put them in the right spot, because them loaders, the back of them are angled. So a lot of people want to try to put it like on that angle, and because when it gets flat is kind of really far, so it seems like, right, it might tip. So what I learned is you put two big ones underneath the flat part, and then way up top where usually there's like a tow hook or something, or like the counterweight is flat, put one tall jack stand underneath that to keep it from, I'd rather use too many jack stands than not enough. But I've seen guys try to use 2 really tall jack stands that are rated, right? For the size of the loader underneath that back of that counterweight that's only like that wide. And it's like, that's so not safe. Like, that is so horrible, because if that thing comes, you got to be underneath the machine to take the axle off. And to undo all that shit, you got to be underneath the machine, and you're going to be tugging on it, right? Because we had a big giant spreader bar to take these axles out, and it'd spread across the top. You would lower it down, or you would pick it all the way up, and you would use big long loop straps to hook around the axles. And then that's how we did it, at least. Big long loop straps around the axle, and you would pull it up or lift it up close to, tight against the frame. So obviously when you undo the bolts, it doesn't just fucking come crashing down. And, I usually use a floor jack underneath there, like a transmission jack, to keep it from doing this number, because it's got the oscillation deal on it, and then it's got the front yoke, which is kind of heavy. Yeah, I just use that to balance it. But that tugging on that axle, with the crane and getting the bolts out and stuff, the last thing you want is that to be hardly on a jack stand. Because, if that whole machine drops and you have that whole weight of the machine on them straps and that crane, you're going to fucking break it. It's going to be a bad day.
That stress load on those straps doesn't do it any favors.
Yep.
That was one thing. I worked with a local guy. He did heavy equipment, and he was talking to me about a kid that made a mistake in his shop, and it was the belly pan on a dozer, and you know how heavy those things are.
Yes.
And that's just the plate itself.
Yep.
That's not including all the crap that's on.
Like that freaking thick, and then you got this much dirt and dust under there, packed in there. Yeah.
And he had a kid in there, and he said, "Go ahead and take off that belly pan. Use the jacks and jack stands and stuff like that, and we'll take it down." No, I don't need all that. You realize how heavy that is? He said, and he told the kid, "No, watch it." And he went under, helped him take this belly pan off. He said, "There's over a foot, 2-3 foot of dirt on top of this thing. It just doubled, if not tripled, the weight of that plate."
Yep. Well, a plate that's already like 500 pounds to begin with.
Yeah. So you had to be careful about which jacks you're using, because the instant you think you have it cleared and you think you got it up, you go break that thing loose. That jack might let go if you don't have enough, if it's not a big enough jack to hold it up.
Yeah, or like them transmission jacks are only rated for a certain amount, and I like to use those for those things. They got the big wide plate, and the reason I don't remove axles with just those, which I've seen people do, is because the weight rating, I've watched, especially on used jacks, I obviously have a hook to the crane, and I'll lower it, and I'll try and lower everything at once to keep it from tipping. Front axles, you don't have to worry about any of that, but rear axles you do. And I have dropped the crane too much and watched that transmission jack lower under the relief. Bypass. And it's like, if you were just using that jack stand, or that transmission jack, if you were just using that and you let those bolts go, that thing would have dropped to the ground. It would have crushed you. But people don't like to pay attention to weight ratings on stuff.
No, and that's part of that safety thing, understanding the equipment you have in your own building and how much it actually can do. And if you're not paying attention, it can hurt you. And there's been a few close calls with me, and it's always a fresh reminder, a nice reminder of your mortality when you have a close call like that, and you're like, yeah, maybe I should be paying a little bit more attention. I noticed I was getting a little lax on that.
Yeah.
Because when something bad happens, because next time you may not be so lucky.
Yep. All it takes is one time. All it takes is one fuck up.